Today, we're going to dive into the nature of galactic technology. In this journey, I'm going to bring you forward into the future just a little bit, showing you where we're at and what are the biggest revelations that we are going through now, the recovery of knowledge that's happening now that is enabling us to develop the technological capacity to become part of a much wider, much larger galactic community. How do we bridge with people in other worlds? How do we bridge with societies that have traveled between different star systems and some even to other galaxies for thousands of years to hundreds of thousands of years in some cases? How do we catch up with that culture? And what are the foundational principles and practices of a culture that operates like that, where you have far more than just racial diversity among a species, but species diversity among a galaxy, planetary diversity, biological diversity at levels that, well, perhaps Earth can actually show us a mirror of. But the differences between beings can be difficult to resolve unless you have foundational principles that allow for peacemaking, that allow for harmony and communion and community. So in this journey, we will also gain a lens into what the future of Earth could look like, the way that we can develop our own culture, society, and civilization to make for a more thriving planet. The first step, of course, in opening this door is to look at how do we do superluminal travel and transcend the light speed barrier. This leap is required if we're going to travel to other star systems. But currently, we've only looked at the idea of conventional propulsion in general, the idea that we have to explode giant barrels full of dinosaur blood behind us and literally ride a bomb into the sky. There have been innovations on this conventional propulsion that we've seen over the years, from ion propulsion systems that use accelerated xenon gas thrust through electrostatic charge that blasts out the back. That's a NASA project. To charged plasma thrusters, which leverage the Krypton Hall effect, and that's done by the European Space Agency. To nuclear propulsion, where we're literally pretty much igniting a nuclear blast behind an object and riding the wave of that explosion. But in any of these approaches, with our best estimates for the best acceleration that we can get, we're still looking at, 19,000 years to get to Proxima Centauri, nearest star. So these are not really reasonable. And the dynamics of this approach are very, very old. The earliest rockets we've recorded were from 1260s in China. And this method of travel is basically like taking a huge, big, heavy object with a nice point on it and literally pressing our way through the fabric of space-time. And now when we do this, because space-time is like a fabric of energy, a high tensegrity vacuum structure, which I believe is more accurately described as a plenum that has a huge amount of energy within it, as we will discuss a little bit further in the presentation. And so whenever we accelerate, we speed up, or we push into that, you notice this whenever you hit the gas in the car, what's happening is you're literally bending space-time. You're literally pushing into space and warping space around you, and in fact, warping time. Clocks on airplanes, for example, because they have high acceleration and deceleration rates, clocks on spaceships actually run behind clocks on Earth and have to be reset regularly, not by a lot, but by a little, because of the effects of special relativity and this relationship with gravity and space-time and general relativity. And so the dynamics of this shows us and shows scientists in general that it's not possible to travel faster than light, because as long as you're using this method, you're pushing and warping space and warping space. And it gets to a point where it literally takes infinite energy to go faster. So the more you're warping space, the more energy it takes. And that energy level for acceleration gets more and more and more difficult. So this is not a workable method to do superluminal travel, which is part of the reason why even a lot of movies that we see that are trying to be really realistic, you know, they put people to sleep, they travel for hundreds of years. Of course, during that whole process, there's time dilation that occurs. So for the craft that's sped up and traveled 10 light years to another planet, by the time they get there and they get back, they may have experienced, you know, not that much time in their own selves if they were able to get close to the speed of light. But for people back at home, 20 years have passed in the journey of them traveling to a star and back. So this is not a workable method. So what about anti-gravity? We've all heard this term, we've heard it used. And generally in common conception, again, in mainstream academic world, under general relativity, anti-gravity is impossible, except under contrived circumstances. And there are some contrived circumstances that might be possible. A few of those, the earliest one discussed in 1957 by Sir Hermann Bondi, is called negative mass, the ability to create a negative gravitational mass. In other words, something that literally had the opposite effect on space-time of the pole and the result of the pole pulling the object down to the Earth, but actually create a push and push other fields around, allowing this object to float and move through the gravitational field, even propel itself through space. Of course, no negative mass has ever been found, even though we see this lovely red mass stuff in Star Trek movies and things like that. We haven't actually located anything in the universe that produces this kind of effect. There's another approach that's been used over a lot of the past century, which is called magnetogravitotorsion in some cases, or magnetogravitopropellant. And in this case, what is usually done is that a very, very high level magnetic field is spun around an object. And it's been found that extremely high level magnetic fields can actually distort gravitational fields. There are some records of that. And a lot of the research of this has been pretty much black ops and done in secret. And some of the kind of dangerous outputs of ways that that can go wrong are seen in things like the Philadelphia experiment, where supposedly a large ship was using one of these devices in order to test it out in the ocean, and the ship ended up teleporting. But when it arrived in another location, a lot of the people on the ship were found partially inside of walls, and everything was mixed up inside of the space. So this might not be a very safe approach. And also another thing about this is that from the disclosure standpoint, it's likely that this kind of technology was based on some recovered spacecraft from a very specific species. And this type of spacecraft seems to be sensitive to certain kinds of electromagnetic fields. Obviously, it's using a magnetic drive, so it's probably sensitive to electromagnetic fields and radiation. And so these craft were actually able to crash, which points to a much lower level technology than maybe actually existing in a lot of other areas of the galaxy, because there are certainly some types of craft witnessed by individuals, shared by contactees, seen by people, experiencers like me, that are absolutely not capable of crashing in that format. And I'm going to discuss why. But it's likely that the ARVs that have been developed here on Earth, a lot of them are based on these craft that crashed and are based on this sort of much more sensitive gravitational drive system. The Tau Zero Foundation has some cool research too, in diametric and disjunction drives and differential sails. And there's some other kind of innovative thoughts around how we can actually warp space. And we're going to talk about those in a little bit more depth. It is important for me to mention though, however, this project, the resonance cavity thruster. Roger Shroyer called it the M drive back in 2001, Guido Fetta, the Canay drive in 2006. And the way that this works literally is the mind opener for scientists that can take them a little bit beyond the idea of explosive-based propulsion, which is what's so common right now. And the way that this device worked is it's literally like a cone inside. And you can see in the kind of larger depiction here on the right side of your screen, the conic structure going down and then entering a tube. Well, that cone goes all the way in. And the way it works is that there's a series of notches and or resonant cavities inside of the structure. And when microwaves are bounced inside the structure, what happens is the microwaves naturally focus towards a source, and it actually causes a what we call a gradient in the space-time field. And this gradient actually causes a propulsion of the device, but there's no output. So there's nothing coming out of it. There's no jet, there's no smoke, there's no rocket fuel, there's nothing like that. It's literally just light bouncing around inside of a cavity, and that light has an effect on the quantum vacuum. And this has been actually a huge awakening for a lot of scientists, because this actually suggests deeply that there's proof that the fabric of space-time itself, the field of space-time, actually has a very, very discrete mechanical property, which is exactly what Einstein said when he said that you can't have general relativity without an ether, that you have to have this fundamental mechanical property to space. And that it also shows us that light is able to interact with that quantum vacuum structure and push against it just by bouncing around. So this is really huge, and it's been tested successfully multiple times by the Chinese and NASA Eagle Works, and it's showing that this virtual plasma toroid, so to speak, that's created inside of this resonant cavity can provide propulsion, and it points us to some of the higher level technologies that we're going to look at. Harold Dwight also has been a major researcher in the area of the Alcubierre drive. And the Alcubierre drive was this vision of being able to warp space in front of the craft and behind a craft in order to propel that craft through space-time. So you can think of it like this. Instead of pushing as much through the fabric, imagine you have a way to take the space-time in front of you, between you and another star, say, and you can somehow condense that space. In other words, shorten that space-time, which means that you're now distorting just space-time and not the craft itself, and you're not having to warp or push through it as much. And that distortion of space-time in front brings the objects in front of you closer to you and expand space-time behind you, pushing the objects behind you further away. It's a very fascinating approach, and there are some very, very realistic models for this. And they've gone so far as to produce videos showing what this sort of futuristic starship looks like. And the reason I want to show you this in particular is because I want you to notice the two major ring systems that you see in the front and the back of this craft. Those two rings are literally the sort of engineering insight into what it might take to actually cause a gravitational distortion in the front of a craft and do that sort of space-time pull, and the distortion in the back of a craft and do that expansion. And we're going to get a lot more into the dynamics of ring systems and what might be possible in terms of creating distortions in the gravitational field and even envelopes around a craft using light. And but this is a really cool rendering, and they're doing some great work. It's pretty inspiring that people are actually technically talking about ways to do this now. Although we haven't actually seen any final outputs, there's nothing that's actually come out of this yet, but the fact that mainstream research is going down this road is very promising. So there's some other dynamics that we can look at that connect to this warp drive concept and also relate to this sort of light interacting with the quantum vacuum. One of those is called what we call field resonance propulsion. And the idea of this is about literally leveraging the fact that gravity has apparent waves. And that gravity waves, because they're created by acceleration, you know, the spinning of an object, a mass moving through space, propagating a waveform, which Einstein claims warps space-time fabric at the speed of light, and that if you could somehow detect the gravitational waves around a field with high precision, as they're trying to do with the laser interferometer space antenna, then what you could do is actually create a electromagnetic field resonance that matches the gravitational wave resonance, and then be able to actually adjust the gravitational field as you adjust that resonant connection between the light and the gravity. And I think that's probably exactly what is actually happening in the resonant cavity thruster that I just showed you, the M drive. Is that it is aligning with the waveform of space-time itself, and that's part of what's allowing that propulsion effect to happen. But this can go further, because as we look into the ideas of jumping to another star system, traveling, you know, all the way through space to somewhere else, we need to understand the localized resonance and gravity fields of different planetary systems. And perhaps if we can understand the exact space-time harmonics, in other words, the sort of light field, the quantum standing light field in another space and its information structure, then maybe we can leverage that information to tell our craft where we're trying to go to. I'm going to unpack that a little bit more, but I just want to give you a little bit of an introduction to that and help you understand that this is related to understanding the dynamics of the quantum field and quantum gravity as a foundation. So one of the interesting research projects that links to both of these things as well is called circulating light beams. Ronald Mallett from the University of Connecticut discussed this project where he suggested that one, matter and energy can make gravity. And of course that makes sense. E equals mc squared, you know, mass makes gravity. Yes, absolutely. But the idea is that if you could basically spin light inside of a structure, then that light spinning inside the structure would then rotate space-time. And if you can shear space-time enough, in other words, cause what we call frame dragging, where each point in space is now becoming or dragging to a different relative space-time than the surrounding space and time, then what occurs through that process is that eventually you can actually create what's called a closed time-like curve. Now, there's an illustration of this, which doesn't do a great job, but it gives you the general idea from the way it's thought about in the academic world, which is that somehow you've bent space back on itself and you've created a gate between the space, and this is creating this closed time-like curve. In other words, a structure that where literally space-time is in a stable sort of its own position, its own existence, that's not tied to the passage of the surrounding space-time. And this initially was by Ronald Mallett done because he was super deeply inspired by the idea of time travel. And he thought, well, if it's possible somehow to loop time around by looping space-time around, maybe there's a way to time travel. But where that really gets interesting for us is that this same kind of effect, learning how to circulate light and how to warp space-time using that could also be created to develop an envelope around a spacecraft. And that envelope or that field boundary could be used to separate the internal space-time of a craft from the external space-time of a craft. And then you have the amazing benefit of being able to move through space-time without the pressure of acceleration. In other words, without warping the surrounding space-time, because you've actually created some kind of dimensional boundary where the craft almost exists in a different dimension, but in reality, it's actually just existing in its own closed space-time curve. So the way that he's been testing this is actually by spinning light inside a photonic crystal. And by doing that, they're noticing that it's actually causing a distortion or a warp in the space-time fabric inside of that spinning light wave. So we're going to unpack that a little bit further, but definitely some exciting progress towards understanding this and developing these technologies at a deeper level. So let's look at the geometry of space a little bit. For those of you that have taken my courses, Quantum Gravity in the Resonance Academy, or even just read the Delegate program, which is now called the Unified Science course, which is free to take in the Resonance Academy, where I wrote modules 3 and 4, which deals with modern physics and unified physics, and of course collaborated immensely with Nassim on module 4 to surface his work and showcase a lot of his work. But this might be pretty familiar to you guys that have taken those courses. And if you haven't, I'm just going to give you a super brief overview on some of our understanding of the geometry of space and how it works. So the common perception is that you have this sort of, flat space time, so to speak, and objects create dimples in that space time. And this is the way we teach kids, it's like you have a tight sheet and you put a ball on it. Yeah, that's gravity, right? Not exactly, because these objects are spinning and that field is spinning and rotating around the object. And it's not just that other balls are rolling around an object because, there's a dimple, because if it was just like that, it would look like one of those coin games that you play, at certain astronomical observatories and museums, where you just put in the coin and it rolls around and it just goes right down to the center. Well, in this case, the whole field is actually turning and moving with the object. So each object's in its own dimple, its own vortex, and each of those vortexes are moving in relationship to each other. And this also doesn't really give you the three-dimensional sense of what's happening or how mass is being generated and created. And without understanding how mass is generated and how mass affects space-time, well, we're certainly not going to be able to solve the puzzle of how to travel through space-time faster than light if we don't understand that. So let's understand that a little bit more. Space-time is a flow of vortices, as I was saying, and we can look at that, in the terms of the sun and the planets, and we see actually this full fluid flow that space moves in together. Now, of course, the sun is moving around the galactic center. It's also in larger spiral interactions with other stars. And so the entire galaxy is like a series of DNA coils winding and unwinding themselves and turning. And this is like a waveform, right? And literally, it's a waveform gravitationally. It's also creating waveforms in terms of electromagnetism and light, because as these stars move around the galactic core, there's different amounts of the energy coming from the galactic core that are able to enter those star systems. And the sun is also refracting off of and reflecting off of all the different planets in its solar system in different ways through time. And all of that's creating different lensing and light conjunctions on each planet, including the Earth, as well as different gravitational wave conjunctions. And all of these things may give rise to the kinds of consciousness cycles and properties that many metaphysicians describe as astrology. And so there are absolutely energetic cycles and vortice patterns going on inside of space-time itself. And space-time goes through waves. Do they look like this? close, but not quite, because in this case, we're looking at hexagonal structures, and we're assuming that those hexagons want to be able to warp like that. As some of you may know, we talk a lot about the tetrahedron and the triangle as the foundational unit of space-time in unified physics. And this, as far as we can tell, is absolutely true, because from thermodynamic principles, space-time always wants to get into equilibrium, right? It wants to be in balance. Everything wants to get back to equilibrium, back to balance, to, you know, highest potential state, lowest active state. And to do this with any highly energetic field, you're basically going to have, you know, high energy vibrating nodes, and they're going to be in a tensegrity with each other. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about what that looks like. And this tensegrity between the nodes, this push and this pull, as we can say, is actually causing the structure itself to stay in as close to perfect triangular and tetrahedral format as possible. And this works pretty well until we get to the point where we're looking at, you know, how gravitational curvature occurs. And this is not flat surfaces, by the way. These are 3D spherical interpenetrating clusters of a field that we call the Planck spherical units. Now, the intersections between these Planck spherical units are also something we call the Tryon ray, which are actually like waveform cavities. And these different components together, we can see that you basically have these vibrational resonating points in space that have an attractive bond to each other and a radiative vibration. So they've got a balance between their pull and their push. And that's what Buckminster Fuller was talking about when he was talking about tensegrity. And we just apply that to the fundamental energy structure of space-time itself. You can learn a lot more about that inside of my quantum gravity course. But for our purposes here, it's just important to understand this geometric arrangement that is space-time in state of total equilibrium. In other words, when space-time's like this, we don't even notice there's anything there. There's no mass there. It seems to us as if it's completely empty, as if there's nothing happening. The only way we detect the tension of this structure of space is when we accelerate. It's when we actually hit the gas, or we swing our arm, or we swing the baseball bat or the golf club. And the movement that we do through space-time gives us the experience of pushing against this structure. And that is exactly what we call G-force.
Hi there, everyone. This is Neil with Portal to Ascension, and I want to just take a moment here, just a quick minute after this video. Firstly, the video that you just saw is one of the many event productions that Portal to Ascension that I've created over the years, created hundreds of events, and now we have an archive that's kind of like Netflix for consciousness on our website. I'm just going to show you really quick how you can sign up right now and view and navigate hundreds of hours of presentations, many of them, most of them for free, and utilize the Portal to Ascension platform. So you go to the website, portaltoascension.org, you type in your name, email. Pretty soon we're relaunching a new website, so everything's going to look a little bit different, but pretty much the same thing. Go to the website, enter your name, email, click sign up. You'll then, within a few minutes, get an email sent to your sent to you that will have login information with a temporary password to log into the site. You then go to login, you enter your email address, the password given to you, and you click login. And this will take you directly into the back end of our website, where you can navigate all of the footage that's available to you. And you can see here, you can type and start searching for a speaker, topic, whatever you want, true world history, William Henry. You can type anything over there. You can browse by category: advanced technology, ancient civilizations, ascension, conference, conscious business, conspiracies, divine feminine, evolution of consciousness, extraterrestrial awareness, hot chakra, holistic healing, and so on and so on and so on. And then you can even browse by speaker here, and you can see on the right hand side starts with Adam Apollo in alphabetical order, and you can browse by each speaker and look at their videos as well. And the way it works is we have it all split up here. my webinars, which is where we are right now, my watch list, so you can add things to your watch list, watch later, and then documentaries where you can watch documentaries and interviews that we've done. All the presentations are laid out in the grid over for you here. All you have to do to watch one is click on it. And there you go, it's right here. We also have suggested webinars for you, the description, the speaker info, the speaker bio page. So it's really become a one-stop shop for consciousness. So if you want to check out the full presentation of what you just saw, if you want to check out any other of these presentations, or just have this place, this amazing resource for you that's a one-stop shop for all things consciousness, where we're not only do we have all this content and footage from the past, but we're constantly creating events and footage every single week. We do around 110 events a year at this point. 80% of them are online. So go ahead and sign up. Go to portaltoascension.org and take a look at all the amazing information that we have there for you.